Welcome to Whispers of History, the quiet corner of YouTube where you can doze off while secretly becoming the person in the room. Here, history doesn't shout, it hums, mumbles, and occasionally sighs. If you enjoy slow storytelling, obscure facts, and the kind of soothing narrative that feels like being wrapped in a medieval wool blanket, scratchy but sincere, you're in the right place. Before we begin, do me a gentle favor. Like this video so the algorithm knows you're not snoring yet. Subscribe if you're the kind of person who's ever wondered about ancient cheese taxes, and comment below with your location and local time. I like imagining where you're listening from. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. We're going back to the muddy fields and smoky kitchens of medieval Europe to meet the poets who wore linen tunics, loved their bees more than most relatives, and whispered sonnets to their hives like tiny, buzzing gods were listening. You open your eyes to fog. It's not unpleasant, more like the steam off a morning kettle. The world smells like damp grass, sheep, and the faint sweetness of honey warming in a pot. You're standing in a meadow that's been trampled just enough to be a path, hemmed in by hedgerows that hum with unseen life. It's the year 1327, give or take, nobody's exactly sure. Dates aren't terribly fashionable yet. Calendars are mostly for saints, and you're in the English countryside and you're here to meet a beekeeper. He's not famous unless you count a 17-line poem he once scratched onto birch bark and lost in a storm. Which, of course, he does. A soft breeze tousles your hair. The sun hasn't properly risen, it's more like it's negotiating the terms. Everything feels sleepy and slightly crooked, the kind of morning where even the roosters seem unsure. In the distance, a man in a long, hooded tunic is talking to a box. Not angrily, more like apologetically. "Forgive the clumsy harvest," he says. "I was thinking of Marjorie again." The box naturally does not reply, but the bees inside are listening, always listening. He believes bees understand longing. Not because of science, there's none of that yet, but because he once cried near a hive and the bees swarmed gently instead of stinging. Coincidence? Probably. Comforting? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether medieval beekeepers really believed their bees could understand poetry, or if it was just what lonely men with too many wax burns told themselves. What we do know is this isn't alone. Across Europe, hives were sung to, prayed over, and in some particularly dramatic German villages, warned about infidelity in the household. Yes, truly, if your spouse cheated, you told the bees, it was etiquette. It has 3 hives. They're each named after dead sisters he never met, and he speaks to them like they're old, slightly judgmental friends. You walk with him now, stepping carefully through the wet grass while he hums a little tune about spring rain and bee wings. The melody isn't good, but it's heartfelt. Nearby, a neighbor's pig is escaping again. It snorts like it's been personally wronged by gravity, thundering past with all the grace of a barrel full of turnips. Doesn't flinch. Neither do you. The pig does this every Tuesday. He opens one of the hives slowly, respectfully, like a priest lifting the lid of a relic. Inside, the bees are calm. Not because of song, probably because it's still too cold to be mad. He sets down a small offering, a slice of apple and a finger-length scroll tied with wool. The poem is bad, the bees do not care. And so begins your first day in the meadow, with poetry, livestock, and insects that know more than they're letting on. You probably won't make it through this day, but then again, you're not supposed to. The morning wears on like a damp sock, slowly, inevitably, and with a vague sense of discomfort. You follow back to his cottage, which is only slightly larger than a modern walk-in closet and smells like beeswax, rye bread, and old secrets. Inside, everything is made of wood except the floor, which is mostly dirt pretending to be furniture. A kettle sings softly over a hearth that spits with weak enthusiasm. There are 3 books, all borrowed and none of them returned. A dusty psalter, a bestiary, and something that might be a cookbook, though most of the recipes involve boiling things until regret is achieved. Thus, wife is away visiting her sister who may or may not have consumption. That part changes depending on who you ask. The important thing is home alone with bees and metaphors. He sits at the little wobbly table and writes. He's trying to compose something new for Hive Marjorie, something about the color of pollen in moonlight. He chews his quill like it insulted his mother. Outside, the bees hum their indifference. You step outside for air. The world is louder than you remembered, crows arguing in Latin, sheep bleating their opinion on property boundaries, a distant child screaming about soup. Across the hedgerow, another beekeeper stands by her hive. This one is wearing a green cloak and a look of mild contempt. Her name is, and she's unofficial rival. They once argued for 2 weeks over whether bees prefer lavender or thyme. The church eventually intervened. Believes in silence. She does not sing to her bees. She believes the bees read your soul and would sting accordingly. She might be right. One time, a tax collector came too close to her hive. He left with 3 stings and a sudden urge to rethink his profession. You watch as she scoops honey with a carved spoon, murmuring a blessing that might just be a threat. Waves at her. She does not wave back. In this strange medieval corner of the world, beekeeping is poetry, politics, and petty drama rolled into one. There are records, real ones, that show disputes between neighbors over hive placement, stolen swarms, and accusations of bee sorcery. In one French village, a woman was blamed for summoning her neighbor's bees into her bonnet. The case was never resolved. Historians still debate whether these stories were literal or symbolic, or more likely, just incredibly bored people living incredibly bug-filled lives. Back in cottage, the poem is finally finished. It rhymes sting with spring and somehow also divine suffering. You're not impressed, the bees politely neutral. He tucks the parchment into a wooden tube and prepares for the walk back to the meadow. It's a ritual now, writing, walking, reading, waiting. He says the bees respond better to poems read aloud. You don't question it, you're just here for the atmosphere. And as you walk back together, the wind picks up slightly. The hedgerows shiver, you think you see watching, or maybe it's just a goose with strong opinions. Either way, the story of the bees continues. And the poem, well, it may not be good, but at least it's honest. The afternoon rolls in with the elegance of a damp wool sock again. Clouds drift like lazy sheep and a soft drizzle begins, more suggestion than storm. It's the kind of rain that medieval poets call God's sigh. Calls it a good day for hive whispering. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you nod. Back in the meadow stands before Hive Marjorie with the reverence of a knight before a queen. He clears his throat, holds out his wooden poem tube and recites, O golden wives of sun and bloom, who sip the breath of summer's room. You zone out a little somewhere around the third couplet about dew and destiny. The bees remain still. A few crawl out and buzz around his hood, not menacingly, just inspecting the performance like sleepy critics. Nearby, a monk trudges past with a wheelbarrow full of bread. You blink, he blinks. No words are exchanged. The wheel squeaks a little, like it too is burdened by the metaphysics of rural life. The beekeeping in this era is part craft, part prayer, and part social currency. Honey isn't just sweet, it's soft diplomacy. A gift to the church, a bribe to the reeve, and occasionally an apology to when he forgets anniversaries. Today's major historical fact arrives quietly. In medieval Europe, bee colonies were sometimes bequeathed in wills. That's right, people left hives to their children like prized jewels. A good hive was inheritance. A bad hive, well, that's how family feuds began. And here's your weird cultural tidbit. In certain rural English regions, bees were invited to funerals. Yes, invited. Someone would go to the hive and whisper, "Your keeper has passed." If you forgot, legend said the bees might die, flee, or worse, stop making honey. Of course, takes this very seriously. Bees are loyal, he says, but sensitive. He once fasted for a day after a particularly rude sneeze near hive. Whether the bees noticed is unclear. Whether noticed the drama, unquestionably. Historians still debate whether this funeral bee custom was symbolic or widespread. Was it spiritual reverence or emotional projection on tiny flying accountants? Hard to say. The poem ends, bows, one bee lands on his nose, you both freeze, he does not swat. The bee lifts off again, bored, takes that as a sign of approval. You take it as a cue to walk back toward the path before he starts composing a sequel. You glance at the hedge, is still there, still watching. Possibly judging, or maybe that's just her resting beekeeper face. You find yourself walking beside as he carries a wicker basket of honeycomb, tucked in leaves like treasure. The scent is warm, floral, slightly fermented, the kind of sweetness that makes you feel like a bear with a secret. You pass by the same wandering pig, still upset, still committed to its sprinting. A dog barks in the distance like it's writing a manifesto. The village hums in the background, full of clattering pots, gossip about saints, and a suspicious amount of firewood arranging. The local market is a short walk, but everything is a short walk when roads are made of mud and nobody in a rush. The honey is for trade. Not for money that's scarce, but for fish, dried apples, or possibly a favor involving someone's goat. It's all very flexible. Sets up at a cloth-covered stall next to an old woman selling herbs and a teenager selling suspiciously warm cheese. You watch as he lays out his jars, each labeled in rough script. Spring bloom, midsummer gold, and one ominously labeled batch do not return. A few villagers pass by, inspecting the honey like they're choosing a spouse. One asks, "Is this from Hive?" Nods proudly. Apparently has a reputation. The man buys 2 jars and mutters something about digestion. Now here's a curious historical fact. In many medieval towns, honey was the only sweetener available. Sugar didn't arrive until much later and was outrageously expensive. Honey wasn't just a treat, it was medicine, preservative, and sometimes currency. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In some Slavic traditions, honey was believed to carry the soul of flowers. Drinking it meant taking in the essence of the meadow's spirit. That's why spilling it was considered mildly cursed. Not full excommunication, just good luck with your cows this winter, cursed. The teenager with the cheese offers a trade, 1 wedge of cheese for 1 poem, accepts. He recites a piece called Ode to an Overripe Pear. It rhymes squish with wish. You consider running, but you're invested now. Historians still debate whether these beekeeping poems were genuinely artistic or just elaborate excuses for awkward men to avoid conversation. Either way, the crowd claps. One person says, "That was vivid." A trade done, packs his empty basket and smiles with the satisfaction of someone who believes art and honey should always travel together. You walk back toward the cottage. The light is starting to soften, the golden hour of medieval life, when the sky looks like it's been brushed with butter and everyone pretends they aren't already tired. The bees will be waiting and likely unimpressed, but he's planning tomorrow's verse already. You return with just in time for evening prayers, not at church, mind you, but at the Hives. He insists on a nightly benediction, something gentle, something about safety and survival. You're not sure whether he's protecting the bees or asking them to protect him. The wind has calmed. The meadow rests under a pale lavender sky. The air is full of smells that are harder to describe than you'd expect, earthy, musky, with a trace of warmth like someone's baking bread 3 fields away. Lights a beeswax candle and kneels in front of Hive. His prayer isn't long, just a whisper of gratitude, a promise not to harvest tomorrow, and something about's return. You suspect the last part isn't for the bees. Tonight's major historical fact hums quietly in the background. Medieval beekeeping manuals existed. Written by monks mostly, one such text, Bees and Their Virtues, title translations vary, suggests that bees are servants of harmony and describes their hive behavior as a model for ideal Christian society. Yes, even the drones. He doesn't read Latin, but he has opinions. He once tried to copy a monk's diagram of hive structures and ended up building something that attracted hornets. The hornets did not appreciate poetry. Your obscure cultural tidbit tonight. In parts of rural France, beekeepers were known to rub salt on the hive's wooden frame to remind the bees of the sea. Why? Unclear. Possibly just superstition, possibly a metaphor, possibly someone was bored. It was the 1300s. You lie on the damp grass, arms behind your head, and look up at the sky that doesn't care what century it is. Stars start to appear slowly, like late guests at a very quiet party. Guy clears his throat and begins to hum again. It's the same tune as this morning, still off-key, still heartfelt. The bees stir but gently. You close your eyes for just a moment. As historians still debate whether these beekeeper rituals were ever formally taught, or if they evolved through trial, error, and emotional overinvestment in tiny winged. You don't care either way. The ground is soft. The candle light flickers. And the hum of the hive feels like a lullaby written in another language. The next morning arrives not with drama but with dew. Everything glistens like someone sneezed diamonds onto the grass. Birds chirp without rhythm. A rooster crows 3 times too late. You stretch, groan, and realize you've slept beside a hive. Is already up. He's covered in pollen and holding a small clay pot. Beeswax salve, he says proudly, for elbows or inner turmoil. You follow him back to the cottage where has returned, along with a goose she didn't leave with. No one asks questions. The goose is now part of the family. It sits near the hearth like it pays rent. Nods at you. She's got the same practical softness as but sharper eyes. You get the sense she doesn't talk to bees, she negotiates with them. As she prepares breakfast, a thin porridge with generous honey tells her about yesterday's poem. She makes a noise halfway between a laugh and a sigh. They don't care, she says, spooning mush into wooden bowls. They're bees. Still, she smiles, and she hands him a folded scrap of linen with a pressed flower inside. For hive Marjorie, she says, something pretty to go with the bad rhymes. Now here's your historical fact to stir into your porridge. In medieval medicine, honey was applied to wounds as a natural antiseptic. It worked better than most of the era's remedies, which included burying toads or placing moldy bread on your forehead. A obscure cultural tidbit of the day, some medieval whispered to bees before births, believing their calm presence soothed the mother. It may have worked, or at least distracted people from the screaming. Historians still debate whether this calming bee belief was symbolic, or just a desperate attempt to add to chaos. You eat in silence. The goose stares ominously, shoos it out the door with her foot. As after breakfast pulls out his scroll of works in progress. Titles include To My Bee Beloved, The Hum of Grace, and Ballad of the Almost Sting. He asks you which one sounds most inspiring. You choose The Hum of Grace because you're polite. The day is beginning again. With porridge, poetry, and the buzz of tiny wings that somehow keep this whole crooked world spinning. Zbai has decided it's a good day to visit the apiary 2 hills over. Brother has new hives, he says, like a child inviting you to see a particularly cool stick. You follow partly out of curiosity, partly because you've learned there's no such thing as refusing when he's excited. The hills roll gently, stitched together with hedges and sheep trails. Everything smells like damp herbs and mild ambition. The clouds are playing it casual, threatening rain, but only to keep everyone humble. The brother lives in a small stone chapel that looks like it gave up on being straight centuries ago. It leans, it sighs, but the bees here, they thrive. Their hives are taller, painted with floral symbols and arranged in an almost sacred circle. It feels like walking into a quiet shrine where the saints have wings and stingers. Greets you both with a grin and hands you each a small honey biscuit that crumbles like joy. For strength, he says, and to keep your teeth suspiciously sticky for hours. You nod solemnly. Now, today's historical fact comes wrapped in cinnamon. Benedictine monks in medieval Europe were some of the most advanced beekeepers of their time. They documented hive behavior, maintained apiaries as both spiritual and economic ventures, and used honey not just in cooking but in candle making, medicine, and manuscript preservation. Yes, manuscript glue made of honey and fish skin. Delicious and durable. The bees at the monastery buzz louder, more organized, like a humming chant. Points to one hive and explains that he sings psalms while tending it. They respond well to Psalm 91, he says, but not 58, too violent. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In early Irish folklore, bees were thought to be messengers between this world and the next. Some said they carried news to the dead. Others believed a soul could temporarily take refuge in a bee. For the record, is open to the idea, but only if the soul is polite. Historians still debate whether these beliefs came from pagan traditions, Christian metaphor, or just centuries of watching bees act mysterious, and deciding it must be spiritual. He shares one of his poems it's called Buzz, O Gentle Spirit. It contains the word thrum 6 times. Listens, nods, and then quietly offers a biscuit in lieu of critique. The wind shifts, a few bees land on your sleeve and just sit, not flying, not moving, just being. You feel like they know something you don't, probably taxes. You leave with crumbs on your chest, sunlight on your back, and the distant hum of psalms woven into wings. On the walk home is uncharacteristically quiet. You ask if something's wrong, he shakes his head. Just thinking about the bees, he says. They're never still, never angry, never lazy, just doing. He pauses. I think I want to be more like them. You're about to offer a poetic reply when he trips over a root and lands in a bramble patch. The bees, it seems, are still winning. As after a brief detour to extract thorns and dignity, you arrive back at the cottage. Is mending a torn tunic while the goose, now named, watches judgmentally from atop a barrel. He shows her a small pouch of beeswax he traded for. She raises an eyebrow. We already have beeswax. He replies, yes, but not this beeswax. You quietly step outside to avoid whatever minor domestic conflict this might evolve into. You head back to the hives where the late afternoon sun casts golden light through the linden trees. It's quiet here but not empty. The air feels full as if nature itself is breathing. A perfect place to linger. Here's your historical fact of the moment. In 14th century England, bee colonies were often taxed. Yes, taxed. Beekeepers were expected to report their number of hives and honey yields were tallied for tithes. It was, in effect, an insect-based audit system. And for your obscure cultural tidbit, some medieval beekeepers believed that if you swore or shouted near a hive, it would sour the honey. Not in taste necessarily, but in moral character. Honey with bad vibes, you can't make this up. Except they might. Now, historians still debate whether this soured by sin belief was practical, religious, or just a desperate attempt to keep apprentices from yelling at bees. Returns and kneels by hive. He gently tucks a fresh sprig of mint into the entrance. "Something cool for your house," he murmurs. A bee lands on his hand and stays for a long moment before drifting off. You sit beside him, not speaking. The world doesn't need your voice right now, it just needs stillness. And maybe some poetry whispered to things that can't answer back. The breeze stirs the tall grass. The hives hum on. Evening again. The sky is bluer than usual, the kind of shade you'd only see in tapestries if someone accidentally mixed too much lapis. Smoke curls from the cottage chimney. Dinner is being prepared, something involving leeks, barley, and the ambitious use of a single egg. You're seated outside on a crooked stool carved himself. It wobbles like it's unsure if it wants to participate. The bees return slowly now, heavy with pollen, like tiny airborne merchants coming home from market. She stands at the cottage door, wiping her hands on her apron. She's watching the sunset with that same measured calm she uses when starts rhyming pollen with solemn. "They never complain," she says, nodding toward the hives. "Wish I could say the same for our roof." Now here's tonight's historical fact. Medieval people often built skeps, dome-shaped beehives made of coiled straw and mud. They weren't opened like modern hives. Instead, beekeepers smoked out the bees and cut the comb whole, meaning many bees didn't survive the harvest. It wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency, if slightly lethal efficiency. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In some Germanic regions, there was a tradition of telling the bees about births, marriages, and deaths. A wedding was not official until the bees had been informed. One story even tells of a bride whispering her vows to the hive before the altar. She later claimed the bees blessed the marriage. The priest was less enthusiastic. Historians still debate whether these practices were rooted in pagan rituals, Christian metaphors, or just the human need to gossip with someone who can't interrupt. Lights a small lantern and sets it beside hive. Light brings them peace, he insists, and helps them dream of flowers. You decide not to mention that bees sleep in short bursts and likely don't have REM cycles. It would ruin the mood. A frog croaks nearby. The goose honks in response. You're not sure if it's a conversation or a declaration of dominance. Either way, you stand up and stretch, bones quietly announcing their discontent. It hums a slow tune, less of a song, more of a lullaby for soil and silence. The hives respond ever so slightly. You wonder if they really do listen, or if it just feels better to believe they do. The next morning begins with chaos, small medieval chaos. Has stolen a boot, is shouting, is barefoot in the dew. You sip weak herbal tea from a wooden cup and watch the scene unfold like it's a local play titled, Why Geese Should Never Be Trusted. Eventually, peace is restored. The boot is returned, slightly chewed. Returns to the kitchen muttering about feathers and curses, plops beside you with a resigned sigh and asks, "Do you think bees ever fight each other?" You consider this. "Only when it matters," you say. He nods solemnly as if you've quoted ancient wisdom instead of guessing. Today is hive maintenance day. Out comes the smoker, a clay pot with smoldering moss and the hive tools, which include a thin blade, a wooden wedge, and a feather. The feather's ceremonial, says, not useful, just poetic. You try not to laugh. Here's your historical fact. Medieval beekeepers used smoke not just to calm bees, but to confuse their spirits. It was believed the smoke dulled the bees' senses, making them forget their instinct to defend, which, ironically, isn't far from what we now know about their neurological response. And your obscure cultural tidbit. Some early apothecaries believed beeswax absorbed spiritual energy. It's why church candles were made of pure beeswax. No tallow, no lard, only the clean burning light of flower-fed flame. Some believed a beeswax candle burned in silence could cleanse a home of invisible sorrow. Historians still debate whether that belief was born from mysticism, psychology, or just centuries of sitting quietly in the dark and hoping for better news. You help lift the hive lid. Inside, the combs are heavy with gold. Bees move like slow dancers, precise and humming. He lifts one comb gently and examines it. "Look at that geometry," he says. "The monks say it's divine." You nod. It's hard to argue with math this beautiful. Suddenly, a bee flies directly into your face. You flinch, chuckles. They like you, they only headbutt people they respect. Sure, let's go with that. You spend the rest of the morning watching the bees work, moving in their endless cycle of bloom and buzz. You wonder how they never get tired, or if they do and just don't show it. Back at the cottage, hands you a crust of bread with honey drizzled across it like molten gold. "For your bravery," she says, pointing to the bee that lightly grazed your eyebrow earlier. You chew slowly. The honey tastes like the meadow smells, soft, floral, slightly wild. You sit by the hives and listen. There's no rush. No schedule, just bees, bread, and the quiet joy of doing very little with great attention. You don't remember falling asleep, but when you wake, your cheek is pressed into a patch of clover and the bees are humming like a lullaby you half remember from childhood. You stretch slowly. There's no urgency here, no inbox or bells or deadlines. Just the sun tilting overhead and a faint scent of thyme in the air, as if the world made tea for itself and forgot to drink it. Is already up, of course. He doesn't seem to sleep so much as power down briefly, like an old candle wick waiting to be relit. He's tending to hive Marjorie, whispering something that could be a poem or just a to-do list disguised in rhyme. It is nearby hanging linens that flap like lazy ghosts. Is nowhere to be seen, which usually means trouble is brewing in the root cellar. Sees you stirring and smiles. They didn't sting you in your sleep, he says cheerfully. I think they've adopted you. He pauses. Or they're waiting until you're fully ripe. You're not sure whether to feel complimented or mildly threatened. Today is what calls a thinking day. Not a harvesting day, not a trading day. Just a day to walk around the hives, murmur a few stanzas, and pretend the bees are offering literary critique. He carries a notebook bound with thread filled with smeared ink and flower stains. Ideas happen when you're not looking for them, he says, tucking a fresh quill behind his ear. Your walk through the meadow is slow. Everything in this part of the world is designed to move at a pace just above a nap. The grass is thick, the air soft, and the path winds like it forgot where it was going. Bees dart in and out of wild poppies. A dragonfly zips by with the grace of a drunk needle. Stops at a cluster of elder trees and points to a hollow in the bark. Wild hive, he says reverently. Untouched, unsung. There's something about the way he says it that makes you believe these bees are ancient poets who rejected society. Monastic insects with creative integrity. Now for your historical fact. Wild hives were once considered sacred in some parts of Europe. Peasants would mark tree hives with chalk crosses and vow never to cut them down. To do so, they believed invited misfortune, or at the very least, sour honey for 7 years. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In parts of the Balkans, it was said that if you wanted to discover a thief in your village, you could place honey on the doorstep of each household. By morning, the hive that had been wronged would guide its bees only to the thief's home. No records confirm whether this worked, but it certainly made for tense mornings. As historians still debate whether these beliefs were meant as moral deterrents, or if bees really could detect lies and larceny. Either way, you'd think twice before stealing honey here. Sits beneath the elder tree and begins to write. You watch his brow furrow in deep, contemplative effort, then relax as he gently chews the end of his quill. You know from earlier, this is part of the ritual, thoughtful nibbling. A few deep sighs, a bee landing on his ankle like punctuation. He reads aloud. O hive of none and one and alls. You keep your secrets small and tall. Do you remember who you were? Before the flowers whispered you to stir. You don't say anything because the bees are quiet now and it feels wrong to break the spell. You lie back in the grass. A cloud shaped like a crooked spoon drifts overhead. Lies down 2 arms behind his head. Do you think they dream? He asks. He nods. You shrug. If they do, I hope it's about fields that never end. He smiles and closes his eyes. The wind carries pollen and the world drifts quietly forward, buzzing, breathing, barely moving. The mood shifts after lunch. Has returned from the neighboring village with news. Someone's been placing their hives too close to the common well. The bees are getting territorial and the baker's assistant has been stung 3 times in one elbow. He wept, says Flatly, ladling turnip stew. He wept like it was war. Frowns, you have to introduce bees to a village, ease them in. He stabs at a turnip like it represents the careless beekeeper. Over lunch, you learn more than you ever intended about the politics of bee placement. Apparently, hives must be a respectful distance from roads, windows, and anything that involves people with opinions. The church once issued a decree about it. The language was vague, but the message was clear. Thou shalt not weaponize thy bees. You finish your stew and offer to help check the hives which have started behaving oddly. Less buzzing, more packing, he says. You're not sure how a bee can pace, but he insists he can tell. And now your historical fact. Some medieval beekeepers believed that bees could sense the emotions of their keepers. A sad beekeeper made sluggish bees, an angry one, aggressive swarms. It was both superstition and surprisingly sound husbandry, since calm behavior does reduce stings. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In a 14th century Spanish village, records show a woman was accused of cursing a rival's hive by looking at it while wearing red. The case was dismissed due to lack of witnesses among the bees. Historians still debate whether this was religious paranoia or just pre-modern fashion policing. Back at the meadow, approaches hive with the caution of a man meeting an old friend after a misunderstanding. He kneels, places one hand on the wooden frame and hums. Slowly the buzzing returns, not frantic but rhythmic. Content. I just needed reassurance, he says softly. We all do. You spend the rest of the afternoon with your ear to the hive. The sound is low and soothing, like nature's version of a lullaby. It occurs to you that the bees don't worry about whether they're doing it right. They don't panic over a bad poem or stew over yesterday's clumsy harvest. They just keep moving, keep building, keep tending their invisible empire. You close your eyes again and feel the warmth of the hive through the wood. A bee brushes your wrist. It doesn't sting, it simply lands and rests. While you do the same. You wake again not from sound but from warmth. The sun has shifted low, casting honey-colored light across the meadow like someone spilled a jar of sunlight. You blink into it slowly as if the world itself is encouraging you to take your time. A breeze moves through the linden trees. You don't check a clock, you don't need to. Is sitting a few feet away, whittling a thin branch into what might one day be a spoon, or perhaps a writing quill, or perhaps nothing at all. He hums softly. The tune is the same as before. You realize it has no real melody, just a comforting repetition, like a phrase you've heard so often it loses meaning and becomes music. The goose strolls past, feathers puffed out like he owns the lace on this land. You give him a wide berth. Says he once chased a priest into a tree, you believe her. Offers you a piece of flatbread folded around a slice of baked apple and, of course, a generous smear of honey. They make it taste better, he says, gesturing toward the hives. Even when the apples are mediocre. As you eat, he tells you about a dream he had last night. He was a bee flying over the fields, but when he looked down at the flowers, they were all tiny faces. Some were singing, some were sleeping. One looked like you. He pauses. I'm not sure if that's comforting or alarming. You don't know either. You both laugh softly. Your historical fact for this late golden hour is that bees were believed to be divine gifts, quite literally. In ancient Christian iconography, they were symbols of the soul, resurrection, and order. In medieval manuscripts, bees often appear in illuminated margins next to passages about purity and hard work. Some monks even believed that bees were created from the bodies of dead oxen, an old idea passed down from Aristotle called spontaneous generation. Oddly poetic, deeply incorrect. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In medieval Lithuania, hives were often carved with protective faces. Grimacing wooden visages meant to scare off thieves, spirits, or overly curious neighbors. Some villagers believed the bees could recognize faces and would refuse to produce honey if moved too far from their guardian totems. Superstition or ancient facial recognition, who's to say? Historians still debate how much of this was religion, how much was rural myth, and how much was just people trying to make sense of something they couldn't control. You and sit in silence as the sun slips lower, and for a moment time seems to vanish. There's no rush, no plans. Only the low, steady hum from the hives and the rustling of bees returning home with legs fat with pollen. It's like watching a heartbeat in slow motion. Eventually stands and stretches, joints creaking like old wood. I think they need a new poem, he says, something simple, maybe just, thank you. You follow him as he gathers his parchment and feather, dipping the tip into a pot of ink made from crushed berries and soot. The ink smells faintly like burnt fruit. He scribbles quietly, lips moving with each line. He doesn't read it aloud this time. He simply tucks it beneath a small stone near Hive. They don't need to hear it, he says. They just need to know it's there. You don't quite understand, but somehow it makes sense. Night falls slowly here as if reluctant to interrupt. The sky purples first, then deepens to blue, then black. Stars appear one by one like shy performers in a silent play. The air cools and the smells change, crushed grass, chimney smoke, and something faintly minty drifting from the hedgerows. Inside the cottage is preparing what she calls sweet broth, which is mostly boiled oats and cinnamon but feels like a feast after the long, soft day. She hums an old melody while she stirs. You don't recognize the tune, but you recognize the feeling, something about warmth, about being held. Lights a beeswax candle and places it between you. It casts a soft glow on the cottage walls, where shadows of jars and hanging herbs dance like quiet spirits. As after dinner you sit by the fire and pulls out an old scroll. It's frayed at the edges and stained with what might be mead or age or both. Gave me this, he says, years ago, said it was nonsense. He grins, which is how you know it's worth reading. He unrolls the parchment and reads, "Though the hives has no king, yet all obey. Though the drone gives little, yet is honored. Though the worker labors, yet sings. And the queen rules without speaking. How he looks up, they knew more than they let on, I think. Here's your historical fact for the firelit evening. The understanding of bees having a queen only became common in the early modern period. For centuries, it was assumed that the hive's leader was male, a king bee. It wasn't until 1586 that Tours correctly identified the ruler as female. But in this world, the myth of the bee king still reigns quietly. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In some parts of medieval Persia, beekeepers believed that playing the lute near a hive could encourage more productive honey making. There's no record of whether this worked, but one poem describes a beekeeper so devoted he composed ballads for every season, adjusting the melody for rainfall. Historians still debate whether bees respond to music. Science says sort of, but no lute solos required. As the fire dies down, begins clearing bowls. Is already asleep, neck tucked awkwardly, dreams likely full of stolen boots and soft revenge. Looks at the candle, then at the hives just visible through the window. Do you think they know we love them? He asks. Now you consider it, maybe you say, or maybe they just like the poems. He chuckles, fair enough. As the candle burns lower, the room grows quieter. The hum of the hives continues in your memory, even if you can no longer hear it. And before sleep finds you again, you whisper one small truth to yourself. Though there is beauty in tending to things that cannot say thank you. You dream, or perhaps you drift, not quite awake, not quite gone. In this space, time is honey-thick, slow and golden. You see the meadow from above, not flying but floating, like a puff of dandelion caught on a breeze that forgot where it was going. Below, the hives glow faintly. They breathe. Not literally, of course, but you feel them pulsing with a soft rhythm like the heartbeat of a living library. Every cell in the honeycomb seems to hold a memory. A summer morning, a broken branch, a prayer whispered under starlight. You can't explain how you know this, you just do. You hear voices, not human, not words, but something older. A language of vibration and vibration only. It's not about meaning, it's about being. And just when the dream begins to unravel into something clearer, you wake. Your bed is straw, your blanket is wool. The fire has gone out, but the coals still sigh faintly in the hearth. It is already stirring a pot. You can tell by the smell that she's boiling wild herbs. Not for sickness today, she says, is a day of clearing. The bees can tell when a house is muddled, she mutters. Like they can smell a thought out of place. As outside is perched on a stool, sketching in the dirt with a stick. He's trying to draw the movement of bees mid-flight, but so far it looks like a tangle of worms playing tag. I think they follow invisible rivers, he says. Like currents. The air has roads in it, we just can't see them. Now you nod, because on some level this feels true. Here's your historical fact. In the medieval Islamic world, scholars like Aland Al wrote detailed treatises on bees, their navigation, and hive behavior. They observed that bees communicate by motion, centuries before modern science confirmed the waggle dance as a form of directional messaging. It turns out bees do have maps, just very small, very jiggly ones. And here's your obscure cultural tidbit. In a remote village, it was believed that bees could carry messages to the dead, but only if the message was sealed in wax and placed inside the hive at dusk. The hive would process the note overnight, and if it remained untouched by morning, the spirit had received it. If it was chewed, well, some souls were not ready to listen. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or local lore. The wax letters, however, have been found, small scrolls with illegible ink, rolled like secrets never meant to be answered. Us eventually gives up on his drawing and instead begins writing a new poem titled Air Roads and Pollen Ghosts. He asks if you'd like to contribute a stanza. You decline but offer him a line, even the sky has memories. He nods approvingly and writes it down. You spend the morning watching the bees go about their work. No confusion, no ceremony. Just the patient persistence of creatures who mastered the art of doing without needing applause. As at midday decides it's time to teach you how to hold a frame. He leads you to hive, carefully lifts the lid, and gently extracts a honeycomb frame heavy with gold and motion. It buzzes like a soft engine. I'll hold here, he says, gesturing to the wooden edge. Steady, respectful, they'll feel your hands. You take it, the weight surprises you, not just the physical heft but the presence. Hundreds of bees move in coordinated chaos across the comb. Some crawl over your fingers, you don't flinch. Oh, they remember you, says, you've sat near them enough, that counts. You believe him, For a few moments, you just stand there holding something ancient and alive, not fearing it, not needing to understand it, just letting it be. Later in the afternoon, pulls out a battered wooden box from under his bed. Inside are scraps of parchment, half-burnt candles, 2 pressed flowers, and a length of blue thread. These are hive gifts, he says reverently. You raise an eyebrow. Things left behind or offered, he explains. Things the bees didn't sting me for taking. He lifts each item as if it's a relic. A tiny comb fallen naturally from a wild hive, a bee wing dried and translucent, a wax bead shaped almost like a heart. Oh, you can't take what isn't given, he says. The bees teach you that. Your historical fact for today. In some parts of Europe, particularly in medieval Bohemia, bee relics were collected and stored in shrines, wax formations, dead queens, or unique cells believed to bring good fortune or fertility to the household. Some were buried under the threshold of new homes. Others were melted into amulets. And your obscure cultural tidbit. There's a recorded tradition in rural Saxony where a young woman could ask a hive if her suitor was worthy. She'd whisper his name to the hive, and if a bee emerged and circled her head, it meant yes. If the hive stayed quiet, time to move on. Historians still debate how many suitors were rejected by bees, and whether some men were simply allergic to commitment and pollen. and as dusk settles, shows you how to gently close a hive for the night. He uses soft cloth and hums while he works, not because it's required, but because it feels right. Bees don't sleep like we do, he explains. They nap, they pause, they rest in shifts. Maybe that's the secret to harmony. You follow his rhythm, gentle motions, quiet sounds, a kind of sacred choreography. No rush, no noise, just the slow folding of a day. She joins you near the hives, carrying a bowl of warm elderflower tea. She hands it to you without a word. The three of you sit together as night unfolds above. Stars blink on. The moon rises like a watchful eye. Offers a final line to the day. Some days the poem writes you back. No one replies, you just sip your tea and listen. The bees are quiet now. Not gone, just sleeping somewhere behind wax walls, dreaming their tiny, tremulous dreams. Morning arrives like an old friend tiptoeing into your room, slow, gentle, not entirely sure whether to knock or let itself in. Light filters through the cottage's shutters in pale slats, stripping the wooden walls with warmth. You stir under your blanket of woven wool and beeswax-scented air. In the next room, the clink of ceramic and the soft swish of a broom tell you has already started the day. Is not in sight, which usually means one of two things. He's at the hives or he's lost in a poem somewhere under a tree. You slip outside barefoot and are greeted by the cool kiss of dew. The grass is impossibly green, the kind of green you'd only see in fairy tales or post-rain postcards. The air smells like mint and damp earth and the faintest trace of smoke from someone's cooking fire down the hill. You find kneeling in the meadow, not near a hive but beside a patch of crushed wildflowers. He's murmuring something too soft to catch, his fingers hovering just above the petals. He looks up at you and smiles sheepishly. Stepped on them yesterday, he says. Thought I'd say sorry. Well, you nod because here that makes perfect sense. The day begins with silence. Not the heavy, awkward kind, but the good kind. The kind of silence that makes you notice things. How the bees greet the sun by dancing above the clover, how each hive hums in a slightly different key, how's face softens every time he hears wings. Here's your historical fact to float gently into your ears. Medieval charters exist in which entire meadows were granted to monasteries solely for their bee pastures. That's right, land was officially transferred for the use of the bees. These weren't just insects. They were agricultural assets, sacred collaborators, and sometimes legal tenants. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In medieval Wales, if you stole another man's hive, the fine was equal to 7 cows or 2 years of manual labor, unless you returned the bees unharmed and recited a public apology. The apology had to be in verse. Yes, a literal poem of remorse to man and bees alike. Historians still debate whether the punishment was effective, or simply resulted in a lot of bad poetry and confused bees. And after a while rises and motions you to follow. It's time to show you the forest hive, he says, eyes twinkling. The secret one. You pass through the far end of the meadow, cross a shallow stream, and enter a patch of old woods. The trees here are tall and thoughtful, You imagine they creak when no one is listening. The air is cooler, thick with the scent of pine needles and mushrooms. Somewhere overhead, a woodpecker is declaring war on a tree. It stops in front of a hollowed birch trunk half covered in moss. Inside, barely visible, is a wild hive. No skeps, no frames, just natural comb shaped like frozen lightning. Now, these bees weren't invited, says, they just arrived, so I left them be. He crouches low and watches them for a long time. You do too. These bees move differently, faster, less synchronized, more like jazz than chant. Some things, he whispers, are better left unorganized. You sit on a nearby log and eat slices of dried pear packed for the trip. Shares another entry from his notebook. This one is untitled. Not every queen wears a crown. Not every sting is a punishment. So sometimes the buzzing is just a reminder. Though that even silence has sound. Now you don't speak, the forest doesn't ask you to. It's mid-afternoon by the time you return to the cottage, and a small group has gathered outside. Villagers, 5 or 6 of them, each holding baskets or small sacks of grain, eggs, or root vegetables. Stands near the hives, arms folded, looking slightly exasperated but not surprised. You recognize one man from the market, the one who praised Hives' honey for helping his digestion. Another wears a red scarf and a face that suggests he's about to make a request he knows might be absurd. He greets them warmly but with a slight wince. It's not the season for wax, he says preemptively. And I'm not trading honey for fiddle lessons again, Marla. Not unless you've improved. The laughter ripples through the group. Turns out today is the semi-regular village ritual of bee consultation. This was never made official, no one announced it, but slowly over the years hives have become a kind of oracle. People come to ask about crops, marriages, illnesses, and dreams. Not because they expect the bees to answer directly, but because the ritual of asking calms them and listens, which, frankly, is rarer than honey in January. One woman brings a cloth bundle. Inside is a sickly houseplant. She wants to place it near Hive Marjorie just for the afternoon, she insists, to see if the bees notice it. A boy brings a small piece of bark with a carved bee shape on it. He places it near the hive and asks quietly if his dog will come home. You don't know if this is superstition or therapy, but it's beautiful either way. Here's your historical fact. In 13th century France, certain abbeys kept listening hives, small wooden hives placed near confessionals or infirmaries, under the belief that the bees absorbed the emotional atmosphere and could act as a divine barometer. If the bees became agitated, it was said to reflect unrest in the souls nearby. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In Sicily, it was once believed that if you danced naked before a beehive at dawn and whispered your desire into the entrance hole, the bees would carry your wish to the gods. This tradition, understandably, was discontinued, mostly due to stings and modesty. Historians still debate whether bees were seen as divine creatures, empathetic mirrors, or just conveniently mysterious enough to project our human longings onto. He doesn't judge the visitors. He just nods, listens, and offers small tokens, an extra wax candle, a folded note to leave near the hive, a sprig of mint for emotional clarity. The boy with the missing dog returns at dusk, grinning. He came back, he says, breathless, covered in burrs and smelling like cabbage, but he came back. Just pats his head. The bees were listening then. The group departs as the sun dips low, carrying their bundles and wax tokens, their plant clippings and half-believed blessings. Some smile, some don't. But they all walk a little slower, a little lighter, like they've left something heavy behind. Sits beside you on the cottage step, his voice barely above a whisper. They think I'm some kind of mystic. You glance at the hives, glowing gently in the last golden light. Oh, you are, you say. Oh, he laughs. I'm just a man who talks to insects and can't rhyme orange. Well, which, to be fair, is most of us. The moon that night rises full and deliberate, like it's checking on things. It glows like a pearl dunked in milk, bathing the meadow in silvery light so clear that even the bees tucked away behind waxen walls must feel it. You sit with and under the old linden tree, sipping a strange brew that smells like sage and apple peels. The goose has taken up a perch nearby, resting his beak on one foot and watching the sky like he's got some unfinished business with the stars. Oh, has brought out her mending, has brought out his thoughts. Did you know, he begins, that some folks think the hum of a hive is the sound of harmony? So you raise an eyebrow, waiting for more. Not metaphorically, literally, that the pitch of a well-balanced hive is a kind of frequency of peace. Monks tried to hum along with it, said it helped them pray longer. Your historical fact tonight. In the 12th century, Cistercian monks wrote of the cantus, the song of the bees. They believed that bees, by divine design, created music that mirrored celestial order. One monk even insisted that if a man could hum the same tone as the hive, he'd be immune to temptation. There's no record of whether that held true in the kitchen near fresh bread. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In parts of Finland and Estonia, hives were once blessed with tuning forks during spring, tapped gently on the frames to wake the bees in harmony. If a hive hummed back in pitch, it was said to be a year of good harvest and low gossip. They were very serious about gossip. Historians still debate whether this practice had real impact, or if it simply gave anxious beekeepers something to do while waiting for the frost to break. It begins humming now, low and steady. Not a melody, just a vibration that feels like it's rolling up from his chest rather than his throat. He matches it to the hives, listening carefully, adjusting until the two sounds thread together like silk. You try it too, yours comes out too high at first. Winces, honks. Lower, whispers, slower, not like a song, like a breath you forgot you were holding. You try again, this time it feels right, the air shivers slightly in front of you. The hive doesn't open, no bee emerges, but the hum stabilizes, levels. You swear the buzzing inside grows smoother. I think they like you, says without looking up from her stitches. Or at least you're not annoying. Well, you take that as high praise. Later that night offers a rare story from his younger days, before the meadow, before he owned bees or poems or a goose with opinions. He speaks of a time when he wandered from monastery to village, always looking for work that didn't feel like a sentence. He tried pottery. He tried translating the Latin names of saints into rhyme. He even tried, briefly, go trangling. None of it fit. Then one day, in a field just like this one, he found a broken skep hive abandoned near a fence post. Bees were still inside, still building. No keeper, no structure, just instinct. He sat beside it until sundown, not moving, not speaking, just listening. Oh, they didn't sting me, he says softly. That's all it took. Oh, he never left the bees again. You lie awake long after the others sleep, listening to the layered sounds of night, crickets, wind, the slow creak of wood cooling in the walls. And beneath it all, like a subterranean lullaby, the low, constant hum of the hives. You wonder how many people in the world are lucky enough to fall asleep to something so ancient and so alive. Well, the next day dawns with a new sound, hoofbeats. Not hurried, not hostile, but distinct. Peeks through the shutter and mutters, "That'll be the reeve." Sighs into his porridge. Has he brought the ledgers again? Yes, she replies, and probably that ridiculous hat. Sure enough, the village reeve soon appears, tall and stiff, and wrapped in more layers than the weather requires. He's wearing a hat that looks like a small pastry had aspirations of becoming a bishop. He carries a leather-bound book under one arm and a face carved from mild disapproval. I'm here for the yearly report, he says without pleasantries. Motions toward the hives. They're still bees, still doing bee things. The reeve doesn't smile. It's not their behavior I'm here for, it's your records. Which brings us to your historical fact. In many parts of feudal Europe, beekeepers were expected to report hive numbers to local officials for taxation purposes. Honey, wax, and even swarms were counted as income. Some towns had official bee recorders, a title that sounds like it should come with a flute, but sadly did not. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In 14th century Hungary, if a beekeeper's hives produced more wax than expected, they were required to donate extra candles to the local church and host a feast for fellow beekeepers. This led to the informal holiday known as Wax Night, which historians say included toasts, folk songs, and at least one incident involving a drunk monk and a beehive worn as a hat. Historians still debate how widespread these feasts were, or whether Wax Night was just the medieval version of an excuse to party. Back in the meadow, the reeve insists on inspecting the hives. Gestures dramatically. Feel free, but I warn you, Hive Marjorie does not like your colognes. The reeve sniffs. I wear rosemary water. That explains it. He approaches the hive with great care and a not-so-great sense of direction, accidentally knocking his hat off with a clumsy elbow. A single bee emerges and buzzes around his ear like a tiny inspector general. The reeve flinches, then steps back, then declares, "Yes, well, everything seems satisfactory." He signs the book, doesn't bother reading it. As the reeve departs, waddles after him, pecking at his boots, watches from the porch, arms crossed. You should have given him the comb from Hive, that would loosened him up. Shrugs, that man could chew sunshine and still taste vinegar. The rest of the afternoon is spent laughing about the reeve's expression and crafting new verses about bees and bureaucracy. You help write a short piece titled "To the Inspector, Whose Face Scared the Honey." You carve it onto a bit of bark and leave it near Hive Marjorie's. She doesn't sting you. You take that as literary approval. You wake to a strange sound, not bees, not birds, not humming through his nose again. It's rhythmic, hollow, like a drum that's forgotten it's not supposed to echo in meadows. You sit up slowly and squint through the rising mist, expecting perhaps a traveling minstrel, or if you're being honest, an unusually aggressive sheep. But it's not a drum. She's at the edge of the field with her own hive cart. A wide-brimmed hood shades her face, and she's knocking softly on the side of one of her skeps with a wooden spoon. Tap, tap, tap. Her bees circle lazily around her like they've just woken up from a long nap and remembered they had somewhere important to be. Is already watching from the hedgerow, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Are you to join him?" She's summoning them, he mutters, like someone commenting on bad theater. You blink, that's a thing. It's her thing. Joins you moments later with a mug of cider. She does this every equinox, she says. Thinks it realigns the hive's inner clocks. Honks in agreement or perhaps disdain. Now here's your historical fact. Some medieval beekeepers believed bees could become confused by the changing of seasons and needed to be reminded through tapping, drumming, or spoken cues that the world was shifting. In Brittany, it was common to whisper, "The sun is walking again," to the hives each spring. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In parts of the Scottish Highlands, beekeepers once believed that placing a silver coin inside the hive on the vernal equinox would bless the honey with healing properties. Some claimed that only honey from silver-touched hives could be used to anoint newborns or dying elders. Historians still debate whether the coin had spiritual significance, or if it was just a well-meaning bribe for better bees. Back in the meadow finishes her tapping and bows her head. A single bee lands on her spoon. She nods solemnly, turns, and carts her hive away, wheels squeaking through the grass like a reluctant choir. Was that normal, you ask? No, says, but that is normal. He's quiet for a while after she leaves, standing at the edge of the grass, watching where her tracks vanish into the trees. Do you think they ever get tired of us? He asks softly. Who? All the bees. You think about it. About the singing, the tapping, the humming, the nomming, the apologizing, the poetry, the coins, the secrets whispered into hive doors. You think about how much humans have poured into these little insects, our fears, our prayers, our metaphors, our grief. And still the bees just keep buzzing. No, you say, I think they don't even notice us most of the time. So smiles, that's oddly comforting. Later that afternoon decides to take you deeper into the woods, to a glen, he says, where bees nest in stone. You don't ask questions anymore. You just bring your boots and a soft sense of wonder. The path winds through dense trees, past mossy rocks and half-forgotten fences, until it opens into a clearing surrounded by old, low walls. Stones stacked not by builders, but by gravity, time, and sheep who didn't care much for property lines. Nestled into the crevices of one of the walls are 3 small wild hives. No skeps, no boxes, just raw, living geometry tucked into the sheltering stone. They've been here longer than I have, says his voice reverent. Maybe longer than this village. Here's your historical fact. In parts of medieval Spain and Ireland, beekeepers used natural formations, hollows in stone walls, crevices in cliffs as hive sites. These bee bowls were considered more sacred than man-made hives and often left completely undisturbed. If a traveler found one, it was customary to leave a token, a feather, a coin, or a verse. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In ancient Slavic traditions, if you stumbled upon a stone hive and took a spoonful of its honey, you were bound to return and repay it within a year or risk losing your voice. Some said the bees would find you and take it themselves. Historians still debate whether this tale originated as folklore or a well-intentioned warning against theft, with a side of poetic flair. You sit on a flat stone and listen. The buzzing here is deeper, lower, more resonant, like a bass line to the forest's quiet song. Kneels beside the hive and lays a single violet flower near the opening. I bring them something every year, he explains. Not to harvest, just to say I know you're here. You wonder how many things in the world go unseen. How many quiet, living things keep the rhythms of life going without demanding credit. Not just bees, not just flowers, but people too. Mothers who hum over boiling pots, elders who remember the names of clouds, children who name the wind. You watch a single bee emerge from the stone and hover before your face. She does not flinch, neither do you. The two of you regard each other not as predator and prey, but as something softer. Fellow. She likes you, whispers. I'm starting to like her too. The bee floats gently away, disappearing into the canopy. You sit there a little longer, the silence filled with distant wings and close breathing. I think this is what poetry is for, says at last. Which part? All this. You don't ask him to define it. Because somehow you already know. The sky that evening turns the color of old parchment, soft gold at the edges, deepening into ink where the trees press against the horizon. A hush settles over the meadow, the kind that makes every movement feel like it needs permission. Even the goose waddles slower, as though he's stepping through the end of a prayer. The dinner is quiet, not somber, just full of that rare silence that comes when everyone's full both in body and in spirit. Ladles out bowls of barley stew, spiced with something sharp and fragrant that makes your tongue tingle. Crumbles a bit of hard cheese into his and stirs slowly, lost in thought. As afterwards he pushes his bowl aside and pulls a book from the shelf, one of only 3 in the cottage. Its leather cover is cracked, the pages stained with age, and the script is so crooked you'd think the quill had been drunk. "Oh, this," he says, "is my grandfather's hive ledger, but it's not numbers, not really." He opens it gently and shows you a page. At first glance, it seems like a list, dates, names, seasons, but then you notice the oddities, notes like hive wept on Tuesday or first frost. Hive mercy sealed early. Is she mourning? Another entry reads simply, rained on the same day Marjorie was born. Hive sang differently. He traces the ink with a careful finger. He believed each hive had its own temperament, he explains. Not just instincts, but moods, personalities, joy, anger, grief. You raise your eyebrow. I know, he chuckles. Maybe it's all projection, maybe we see what we need to see. But I like the idea that the bees are watching. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Medieval manuscripts occasionally describe hives as extensions of the household soul. In certain Flemish towns, it was customary to tell the bees not only of deaths but also of dreams. A bad dream, they believed, could sour a hive's harmony. A good dream, well, that might double your honey yield. And your obscure cultural tidbit. A Norse once warned that if you told a lie near a hive, the bees would carry it into the flowers, and those flowers would bloom with twisted petals. Some claimed to have seen crooked blossoms after a particularly scandalous council meeting. No one confessed. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were cautionary tales for children, or subtle warnings for adults who should known better. Scoffs gently, the bees don't care about your gossip, she says. They care about the rain, the heat, the clumsy way you harvest when you're distracted. But she doesn't close the book. In fact, she reads it quietly for a few moments more, lips moving with the rhythm of old notes, old names, old weather. Meanwhile, begins writing his own entry, date, time, temperature. Thens. A hive made a low sound this morning, may be dreamings. He glances at you. Would you like to add something? You hesitate, then you take the quill and write slowly in awkward but honest script. I sat beside them today. I didn't need to speak. They seemed to know. Nods, they always do. You close the book together and return it to the shelf. Night drapes itself over the cottage like an old wool cloak, slightly itchy but warm in all the right places. The fire burns low, casting long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. Outside, the wind has stilled. Even the trees seem to lean in, listening. The steps outside and motions for you to follow. He's brought a beeswax candle and a small tin cup filled with warm water and dried marjoram. It's time, he says. No, you don't ask for what. No, you just follow. The path to the hives glows faintly in the candlelight. The grass bends gently underfoot, and the world smells like ash, honey, and something ancient. You reach Hive Marjorie and kneels, placing the candle near the base. He begins to hum again, low and quiet, a sound you've come to know as his way of praying when words feel like too much. You kneel beside him. And then he begins. He speaks not to you, not to the night, but to the bees. Marjorie, he says softly, the seasons are turning. Though the air carries frost beneath its breaths. Though the apples have fallen. Though the sky forgets to wake early. And then still you work. And still you dance. Thank you for your sweetness. Thank you for your silences. Thank you for letting us stay. He pauses. Though the hive hums low, steady, it is not louder, not quieter, just present. And then, in a gesture so subtle it feels like a ritual, he pulls from his pocket a small scrap of parchment and presses it into the grass. You glimpse a single word written on it: stay. Some people leave things at temples, he says. I leave things here. Here's your historical fact. In parts of medieval Poland and Transylvania, hives were seen as protectors, not just producers. People would bury charms near them to ward off illness or attract fertility. During times of plague, hives were sometimes covered in embroidered cloth as a shield. No one knew if it worked. But hope, like honey, is something we make when things feel heavy. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In a remote region of medieval Russia, newlyweds were brought before a hive to recite their vows. It was believed the bees would remember the words and sting the first partner who tried to break them. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic or unusually effective couples counseling. Though stands at last and dusts his hands. Let's go, he says, let them rest. You follow him back across the meadow. The stars overhead pulse gently, scattered like spilled sugar. Back in the cottage has set out 2 mugs of lavender milk. She says nothing but nods when you enter. You both sip slowly, letting the heat settle in your chests, snores from under the table. The candle gutters. You lie down that night knowing something has shifted, not dramatically, not visibly. But like the seasons, like the hive's breath, like the world turning on its slow, buzzing axis. Though the bees are still, the house is quiet. And in the space between heartbeat and hum, you feel something very close to peace. The sun rises with more confidence today. It pours over the meadow like it's showing off, golden and thick and syrup slow, catching every edge of dew on the grass, turning spider webs into chandeliers. You wake to its warmth on your face, and for a long, quiet moment you don't move. The smell of the hive clings to your clothes, wax, smoke, wildflower honey. You're beginning to think you'll miss it someday. You step outside and find already there, sitting on an overturned bucket near hive. He's holding something in his lap flat, wrapped in cloth and clearly important. He glances up and smiles. I thought today you might help me make a hive poem, he says, but not with words. He unwraps the bundle. Inside, a wooden panel thin as a book cover, covered in beeswax that's been flattened and carved with strange markings. Spirals, crosses, a line that looks like a river, and small stamped flowers pressed in the corners. This, he says, is a hive tablet. Not official, mind you, just mine. He tells you how, every year on the first truly warm day of spring, he brings a new tablet like this one to Hive Marjorie. Not to read it aloud, not to hang it, just to bury it beneath the skep. Words fade, he says, but symbols hum a little longer. He hands you a blunt stick and gestures to the wax. Add something. You hesitate, then slowly you draw the shape of a sleeping figure beneath a star. You don't know what it means, but it feels right. Here's your historical fact for the morning. In the Mediterranean regions of the Middle Ages, some beekeepers practiced a form of symbolic apiculture, using carved boards, often from olive wood or fig tree branches, buried beneath hives to bring good fortune. Some even included tiny runes or symbols thought to ward off illness or theft. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In the Canary Islands, it was said that bees remembered every face they saw near the hive. So when a child was born, a bee was brought to the house to see the infant. If the bees knew the child from birth, they would never sting it. This led to small ceremonial bee visits, where a worker bee was caught, shown the baby, and gently released. No one recorded whether the bees appreciated the gesture. Historians still debate whether this was a real tradition or an apiarist's tall tale, designed to impress neighbors and terrify toddlers. Melts the edges of the wax board gently with a clay pot filled with warm stones. Then, with a slow and solemn movement, he walks it to Hive Marjorie and lays it down beside her. Not buried, just resting in the grass like an offering. Not all prayers have to ask for something, he murmurs. Some are just thank you notes. You sit with him for a while, watching the sun climb higher. Bees begin to stretch their wings, testing the air. A few fly in slow spirals. One lands on your knee and stays there, unmoving, until the wind picks up and carries her onward. As after breakfast, soft cheese, barley bread, and one perfectly sliced pear, decides it's time to introduce you to something he calls bee walking. No, not a real term, he confesses, but it should be. You follow him into the forest again, this time on a trail you haven't seen before. It curves inward like a spiral, narrowing until even the birds seem quieter. You hear nothing but your own breath and the sound of leaves underfoot. The then stops, points upward. In a tree not 10 feet ahead, a swarm of bees clusters on a branch. Not in a hive, just there, hanging like a velvet pouch of living gold. Thousands of them, suspended in a single shimmering shape. They're between homes, he says. When a hive gets too crowded, they choose a new queen, then the old one leaves. She takes half the workers with her and they look for somewhere new. They rest like this until they decide. You stare, breath shallow. They're scouting, he whispers, sending out tiny explorers to find a future. Here's your historical fact. In medieval England and France, swarm catching was one of the most important and dramatic parts of beekeeping. Entire families would stop what they were doing to help coax a swarm into a skep. It was believed that a swarm landing on your property was a blessing, and many called out prayers or sang hymns as the bees descended. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In some parts of early Italy, beekeepers would wear their finest clothes when catching a swarm, believing that bees preferred to follow people who looked prosperous. There are even reports of men in full woolen robes, trimmed in bright cloth, trying to seduce swarms away from their neighbors. Historians still debate how much of this was symbolic, strategic, or simply fashion-forward bee charming. Doesn't carry a skep today. He has no intention of capturing this swarm, he just wanted you to see it, to watch. They're between, he says quietly, not what they were, not yet what they'll become, just resting in the middles. You stand there a long time. The bees don't move. The swarm buzzes softly, a deep collective breath in a clearing full of old trees and older air. You wonder how many humans live like this, between things, between jobs, between homes, between heartbreaks, hanging onto each other in quiet clusters, waiting for some inner scout to say, "I've found the place." Eventually leads you back out of the woods. He doesn't say much, neither do you. The silence feels full, not empty. As you near the meadow, he finally speaks. Sometimes, he says, I think the reason we keep bees is not to harvest anything. Not wax, not honey, not wisdom. I think we keep them so we have an excuse to stop and watch. You nod. Now there's a sweetness in the stillness. And not all nectar comes in jars. That evening a storm rolls in, not sudden, not loud. It doesn't announce itself with thunderclaps or wind that tears through the valley. Instead, it builds slowly, like a thought trying to remember itself. The sky darkens to a dusty blue. The clouds settle like heavy wool over the tops of the trees. A few birds change course mid-flight, heading for cover. Even seems subdued, packing once around the coop before retreating indoors with suspicious dignity. And inside the cottage is laying out linen strips and clay pots, closes the shutters and checks the roof seams with practiced fingers. Nothing leaks until you forget to look, she mutters. You help where you can, stacking the wood near the hearth, tightening the window latches, laying extra kindling by the fire. The storm isn't violent, but it is serious. You can feel it pressing gently on the walls like it's trying to eavesdrop. Lights a beeswax candle and sets it in the center of the table. Storm nights are hive nights, he says, but also story nights. He pulls out the ledger again, not the record of births and stings, but the older one, the poetic one. The one filled with crooked lines and forgotten ink. Some of these, he explains, aren't mine, they're from others. Travelers, monks, beekeepers who passed through. Sometimes they left a verse, sometimes just a word. He flips to a page near the middle, yellowed and soft. It reads, We found a hive inside a church wall. The bell rang every morning. The honey tasted like forgiveness. He chuckles. That was left by a man who had 6 hives and 1 ex-wife. I'm not sure which inspired the poetry. Here's your historical fact. In medieval Europe, it wasn't uncommon to find wild hives in the stone walls of churches, especially those built near woods or fields. The warmth of sun on stone created perfect conditions. Some abbots considered these hives sacred and forbade their removal. Beeswax from such hives was often reserved for holy candles used only on feast days. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In a village in the French Pyrenees, it was customary during storms to open the window nearest the hives and sing softly, not to calm the bees, but to assure them that the humans were calm. One woman even claimed that her hives produced more honey during storm season if she sang Ave Maria in a minor key. Historians still debate whether bees respond to music emotionally, physiologically, or not at all. But no one debates how many lonely hearts have sung to hives hoping something would hum back. The wind begins to pick up. Outside, rain taps gently on the roof. It sounds like the world is knitting. Brings over 3 mugs, hot water, cloves, and a splash of last year's apple brandy. She joins you at the table. For a while, no one speaks. Then opens the ledger to a blank page. Let's write one together, he says. A storm poem for the bees. The 3 of you stare at the blankness. Then slowly you begin to offer lines. Stars. The wind asks questions we can't answer. Lads. The hive does not reply. But it does not close its door. You think for a moment, then say, maybe that's what faith is. So smiles, that's a good line. He writes it down. The candle flickers. The wind breathes. And for a few long minutes, it feels as if you are the hive. Closed in, warm, trembling quietly, but whole. The next morning is clean, that's the only way to describe it. The world smells scrubbed. The grass is greener, the leaves less dusty, the very air polished like it just woke from a long bath. The bees emerge cautiously, antennae flicking like priests testing incense. The hives hold steady. No damage, no flooding, just a gentle hum of post-storm approval. Surveys the meadow with his hands on his hips like a landlord taking credit for weather he didn't arrange. Less impressed, begins scrubbing soot from the hearth. Everything leaks just a little, she says. Even people. The morning passes slowly. You walk the perimeter of the hives with checking entrances, brushing away fallen twigs, whispering small apologies to anyone disturbed. Suddenly stops beside Hive Mercy. Listen, he says. You do. The hum is higher. Not louder, but sharper, like a string pulled. They're agitated, he murmurs. Too much wind, not enough pollen, they'll settle soon. He reaches into his satchel and pulls out a tiny pouch filled with dried lavender. He pinches a bit, sprinkles it around the hive's base. For calming, he says, and because it smells nicer than worry. Here's your historical fact. In medieval apothecary manuals, it was suggested that bees could be calmed using herbs, lavender, thyme, lemon balm. These herbs were planted near hives not just to attract the bees, but to soothe them. Some monks even bathed in lavender before tending the apiary, hoping their scent would pass as familiar. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In parts of 14th century Burgundy, newlywed couples would be given a bee bundle, a bouquet of calming herbs tied with a thread of wax. They were instructed to hang it above their bed and near their hive. Harmony in the home, it was believed, ensured harmony in the honey. Historians still debate whether these bundles had any measurable effect, or if they were just medieval equivalents of scented candles and passive-aggressive advice. By mid-morning, the hive's hum softens. The bees begin to return to their work, slow, steady, methodical, no drama, no collapse, just patience. You and sit beneath the linden tree again. He leans his head back and closes his eyes. They outlast everything, he says. Flood, fire, winter, even us. He's quiet for a long time. Then softly, and I lost a child, long ago, before Marjorie, before the hives. You don't speak, the wind stills. She wanted to bury something, he continues. Something that would keep working, something that wouldn't forget. You look toward hive Marjorie. She named it, he confirms. Said it felt better to say the name out loud even if no one answered. You sit together a little longer. And now you understand why sings and stitches, and the candle is always lit on storm nights. Not because the bees demand it, but because grief is a hive too. And if you don't tend to it, gently, daily, quietly, it collapses. The afternoon stretches slowly, like a cat in a sunbeam. After the heaviness of the morning, time feels softened, less like something that moves, more like something that floats. You find yourself near hive again, seated on a flat rock that's warmed by the sun and tucked beneath the protective sweep of an elder bush. Is somewhere nearby, quietly pruning dead stalks from the hedgerow. Has gone to trade thread and linen with the neighbor who spins wool by the mill pond. And you, well, you're doing what the bees do best, existing purposefully without rushing. A worker bee lands on your boot. She's dusted in pollen, little golden flecks clinging to her legs like travel stamps. She rests for a moment, then takes off again, zigzagging upward before disappearing into a blur of sky. You think about everything she must have done today. Left the hive, flown over meadows, remembered which flowers to visit, carried back nectar, danced to show others the way, navigated the universe using the sun and scent and something in her tiny body that knows exactly where home is, and still no medals, no poems, no applause. Just another bee doing bee things. And here's your historical fact. Medieval observers, especially monastic scholars, frequently wrote about the hierarchy and discipline of bees. They admired the queen, though many believed she was male, respected the tireless labor of the workers, and feared the aggressive drones. One 13th century manuscript described the hive as a kingdom of perfect labor, where no hand is idle and no voice complains. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In medieval Armenia, brides were sometimes compared to bees in ceremonial poetry, not just for sweetness, but for diligence, loyalty, and the sting of justice if crossed. Some ceremonies even included symbolic honey gifts sealed in beeswax that bore the family's sigil, given to the groom's mother as a warning and a welcome. Historians still debate how literally this was taken, and how many mothers-in-law dared test the metaphor. You pull your knees up to your chest and rest your chin there, watching the hives breathe in the golden light. Returns eventually, dirt-smudged and humming something that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. He sits beside you and offers a baked apple wrapped in cloth. You break it open together with your hands and eat in silence, juice running down your thumbs. I think people always want to believe bees know more than we do, he says finally. They move like they've already made peace with something we haven't even named yet. You nod. Or maybe, he adds, we just like pretending there's an order to things. The breeze picks up again, just enough to rustle the leaves. A few bees come and go. A crow lands on the fence post and tilts its head at you, as if suspicious of your stillness. Leans back and closes his eyes. Some days, he murmurs, I think the world was made for bees and we're just here to watch it happen. You don't disagree. The evening is unusually warm. The kind of warmth that slips into your clothes, settles on your skin, and makes you forget that autumn is creeping over the hills. Returns from her errand with a basket of spun wool and a story about a goose who wandered into the flour mill and left looking like a ghost. Puffs up in what you assume is solidarity. The three of you sit outside under a slow-fading sky. The bees have gone quiet, not silent, just restful. Their work is done for now. Unpacks a bundle of items. A broken piece of comb, a beeswax seal, a feather, and a tiny carved token shaped like a flower. It's tradition, he says. Offerings at the season's turn. He lays each item carefully near Hive. Not inside, never inside. Just close enough that the scent might catch on the evening breeze. You ask if they always do this. Since the first hive answers simply, not because they need it, because we do. She hands you a candle, hand-rolled, short, stubby, but fragrant with something sweet and piney. She lights it and places it near hive margery. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval beekeepers, especially in Northern and Eastern Europe, held quiet seasonal ceremonies at their hives to mark solstices, equinoxes, and harvests. These weren't grand festivals, but private acts of gratitude, laying a flower, lighting a candle, whispering a verse. Some even rang small handbells, believing the vibrations helped bees align with the earth's rhythm. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In 15th century Bohemia, beekeepers occasionally named their hives after saints and recited novenas beside them during hard seasons. One surviving journal notes, "Saint protects the east hive, he does not like rain." local tradition held that saints would visit the hives in dream form to offer advice. One beekeeper claimed Saint told him to move his hives 3 feet north. His honey yield doubled that year. Now, historians still debate whether saints truly had preferences, or whether the bees just liked drier grass. Though the candlelight flickers, catching the folds of his apron and the ridges of his hands. The 3 of you sit in reverence, not solemnity, not sadness, just stillness. Speak softly. We thank the hive for its labor. We thank the wing for its burdens. We thank the sting for its truth. We thank the queen for her silence. And we thank the citizen for living gently. No one responds. The words settle. You feel something inside you loosen. Maybe this is the closest thing to a religion you've ever known. Wax and breath. Work and rest. Ritual and returns. Later, as the stars rise, hands you a blanket. You decide to sleep outside. You lay beneath the sky, listening to the creaks of the wooden hives, the faint chirp of late crickets, the slow ticking of a universe not in a hurry. A single bee crawls near your shoulder, curls up and sleeps. And for the first time in a long time, so do you. You wake before the sun. The stars are still out, faint but insistent, scattered across the sky like breadcrumbs left by a thoughtful dream. The air is cool and still, the kind of stillness that makes you whisper even if no one's around. Dew clings to the grass in glassy pearls, and somewhere far off, a night bird makes a sound that feels more like punctuation than a song. You sit up slowly, wrapped in the woolen blanket gave you, and watch the horizon breathe. The bees aren't awake yet. The hives are quiet, as if holding their breath with you, waiting for the world to begin again. Appears without sound, holding 2 cups of warm barley tea. He passes you one without a word and sits beside you on the grass. You slept near them, he says. You nod. Did you dream? You think for a moment, yes, but I think it was theirs, not mine. He smiles as if he's heard that before. Here's your historical fact for this silent hour. In the 13th century, a monk named of Chartres claimed that bees dreamed in color. He wrote that the buzz of a hive changed frequency depending on moon phase and pollen content, and concluded with great certainty that bees must see visions in sleep as poets do in prayer. Modern science has not confirmed this, but it's a lovely idea. And your obscure cultural tidbit. In old Cornwall, some believed that if you whispered your wish to a sleeping bee, one too cold to fly in early morning, it would carry that wish into the day hidden between its wings. But only if you did not ask twice. Bees apparently do not care for repetition. Historians still debate whether these beliefs originated from practical knowledge or a deep-seated desire to trust something smaller than ourselves. The sun crests the edge of the hills. You sip your tea and watch the light unravel across the meadow. The hives begin to stir. One by one, tiny black and gold bodies emerge, feel the air, and take flight. Not in a rush, just in rhythm. And I have been talking, says softly, about leaving the meadow. While you turn to look at him. Well, we're not sure when, but maybe it's time to let the bees choose their next keepers. The silence that follows is full, not with sadness, but with weight, like a hive full of honey, rich and ready. We'll teach someone else, he says, someone who listens, someone who doesn't ask the bees to speak, but knows how to listen when they do. He glances at you, smiles. I think you'd be good at it. You stare at the hives, the bees now moving freely, dashing between flowers and sky. You don't have to decide now, he adds. But part of you already has. The days that follow blur gently into one another like watercolor on damp parchment. You fall into the rhythm of the place so fully that you stop noticing when things begin or end. You wake with the bees, you walk the meadow. You tend to the hives slowly, deliberately, with hands that have learned how to be trusted. It teaches you how to roll wax candles with warm fingers, how to braid dried herbs for winter storage, how to listen for the change in a hive's pitch that means something is wrong. She says little while she works, but everything she does becomes its own kind of instruction. Shows you how to write bee poetry without ever mentioning bees, how to describe their movements with metaphors instead of measurements. He says, they don't need to hear their name to know it's about them. Your historical fact for these quiet days. In a handful of 15th century Italian villages, there were bee apprenticeships. Young keepers, often orphans or second sons, were taught not only how to build skeps and collect wax, but how to read bee weather, predict swarm behavior, and even compose seasonal blessings. One abbey even preserved a prayer that read, "May your hive be heavy, your queen be gentle, and your sting only used for truth." And your obscure cultural tidbit. In medieval Wales, if a beekeeper's hive failed during the winter, it was customary to carry it through the village at sunrise while ringing a small bell. The idea was to wake the spirits that watched over bees and possibly shame them into returning. The bell was never rung more than once. The second time it was said meant the keeper had been cursed. Historians still debate whether this was spiritual ritual or a clever way to make sure no one neglected their bees when the snow came. One afternoon, while trimming back the overgrown lavender, you find a strange object in the dirt, a tiny clay amulet in the shape of a bee. Squints at it. Not mine, he says. Brushes it off, buried long before us, maybe before anyone. You decide to leave it where it was found, nestling it back into the soil near hive mercy. Some things belong to the earth, you say. That evening, you host a small fire in the meadow. Just the three of you and the bees, sleeping in their warm chambers. Reads from the ledger not facts but fragments. Old lines, mistakes, first drafts, he laughs at some, corrects others. You add a few of your own, scribbled stanzas that rhyme poorly but feel right. The fire burns low. Closes the book and says, "This is the best part of keeping bees." What a part? He looks at the fire. The part where you realize it was never really about the honey. The stars come out again. You know them now by position if not by names. The bees hum in their sleep. And you think quietly that maybe you're humming too. The next morning, everything feels like a beginning disguised as an ending. The sky is pale and cloudless, the kind of blue you only see before the sun commits to its full warmth. The air smells like promise, or at least like freshly turned soil and beeswax. You walk out into the meadow before the others are awake and pause in front of Hive Marjorie. She hums soft, low, familiar now. You kneel in the grass and place your hand against the warm wood. The buzz beneath your palm is steady, neither frantic nor slow. Just present, just alive. For a long time, you sit there and do nothing but listen. It appears at your side eventually, carrying a small sack of tools, a thin-bladed knife, a curved bit of wood, a pair of cloth-wrapped gloves. I've been thinking, he says, setting them down, about what it means to leave something behind. You nod. I don't mean abandon, he adds. I mean leave it with someone who knows what it is, not what it does, but what it is. He unwraps the gloves and passes them to you. They're worn smooth at the fingers, the leather soft and dark from wax and time. We're going to take a hive apart today, he says. Not because it's broken, because it's time to rebuild. You stand and follow. And so begins your apprenticeship's final lesson. Not the poetry, not the humming, not the rituals by candlelight, but the architecture of care. How to lift a frame without shaking it. How to read a queen's trail by the space she leaves behind. How to tell if a cell has gone quiet before the sound does. You and work for hours slowly disassembling Hive. He narrates gently as he goes. This comb is too heavy, it'll collapse if left. We melt this down for candles. Or see here, this cell has 3 eggs, she's confused. Could be the weather, could be age. You scrape, trim, clean, and receipt. You begin to feel the difference between knowledge and knowing. Between what a book teaches and what the bees have already taught your hands. Here's your historical fact for the day. In some medieval convents, nuns were trained in apiculture not for income but as spiritual practice. They tended hives in silence, viewing the work as meditation. One abbess wrote, "To clean a hive is to make ready the chapel of God's smallest choir." And your obscure cultural tidbit. In 15th century Estonia, there was a belief that bees disliked lies. A hive tended by a dishonest person, it was said, would swarm early or produce bitter wax. Beekeepers were required to take oaths of truthfulness before being granted village land. The oath was sometimes given in front of a hive, with one hand on the wood and one on a sprig of thyme. Historians still debate whether this oath was legally binding, or merely a way to root morality in muscle memory. You finish the repair late in the afternoon. Hive has a new structure, lighter, cleaner, reinforced at the joints. Inspects your work and nods. "Oh, she'll like this," he says. Oh, he doesn't mean the queen, he means the hive. The bees begin returning as the sun leans toward evening. You both step back and watch them test the air, circle the new entrance, disappear inside. Calls you from the cottage. Dinner is ready. And as you walk back, pats your shoulder once. Well, you didn't fix a hive, he says. You kept a promise. Now dinner is quiet again, not awkward, just full. Made honey cakes this time. She claims they're too dense, but you eat two without complaint. Snores under the bench, feet twitching in what must be a very aggressive dream. As after the plates are cleared, places a small wooden box on the table and slides it across to you. Inside, a carved piece of skep wood smoothed at the edges with a pattern that's both simple and strange. A spiral, then a ring, then 3 small dots in a perfect line. Well, you touched it. Well, what does it mean, you ask? She shrugs. We don't know. My grandfather carved it, said it came from the first hive. Might been a joke, might been a prayers. Joins you. We each carry one when we travel, when we plant something, when we feel lost. You turn the small tablet over in your hand. It feels heavy for its size, not with weight but with meaning. Oh, you don't have to take the bees, says. Not all of them, not yet, but take this. You nod. There are no words that feel large enough. Later that night, you pack your things slowly. Not because you're leaving just yet, but because it feels like something is shifting. You fold your clothes, wrap a jar of honey in linen, tuck the skep wood charm into your satchel's hidden pocket. You walk out into the meadow one last time, barefoot in the warm grass. The hives glow faintly in the moonlight, each one alive, each one resting. You visit each one by one. Down to a hive, you whisper, "Thank you for teaching me to listen." Down to a hive, Mercy, "Thank you for your patience." Down to a hive, Marjorie, "Thank you for staying." And then, without a script or ceremony, you hum. Not a song, not a hymn, just the sound of gratitude without shape. And from within the hives, the hum rises to meet yours. Not louder, or just enough, or just in harmony. You leave on a day that isn't marked by anything special. No festival, no omen, no feast day on the church calendar, just a normal morning. A sky the color of oat milk, a breeze that smells faintly of damp earth and something blooming out of season. Well, you don't take much. The satchel with your notebook and gloves, a wrapped jar of honey from Hive Marjorie, a few slices of spread. The carved tablet gave you, and tucked into a folded piece of waxed cloth, a dried violet you found near the stone hive. You don't know why, but you feel it belongs with you. Doesn't offer a farewell speech. He's not that sort. Instead, he walks you out to the edge of the meadow and gestures toward the road. The forest goes quiet around noon, he says. But the bridge by the creek is washed out, so take the long way. You nod. Appears then, holding something wrapped in beeswax cloth. It's still warm, a honey cake. For the road, she says, don't let it crumble at the bottom of your bag like last time. I won't. She presses it into your hands, but her fingers linger for a moment longer. Then, as if remembering herself, she steps back and wipes her hands on her apron. Waddles up, honks once, and pecks your boot. A blessing, probably. Now you sling the satchel over your shoulder and take a breath. Then you turn back for one last look at the hives. They're exactly where you left them, standing in their crooked rows like old friends who never ask too much. Bees spiral lazily above them, tiny stars tracing invisible constellations. And then you start walking. Here's your final historical fact. Beekeeping records, true ones written on vellum or carved into soft wood, exist all across Europe, many older than castles or kings. But they're never just about bees. They're about people. Weather, wishes, seasons, love, loss, the rhythm of things. They're the footnotes of the human attempt to understand purpose by watching the purposeful. And your final obscure cultural tidbit. In medieval Ireland, it was believed that if a beekeeper died unexpectedly, their bees would fly to the nearest church and circle it 3 times. Some abbeys even had bee bells ready to ring in such an event. If the bees came, you rang the bell. If they didn't, you listened harder. Historians still debate if bees really performed such funerary feats, or if it was just a way of admitting that grief is louder when carried in wings. You take the long road through the woods. The breezes will stay, but their hum follows you. Not in sound, but in pattern. And in the way your feet land softly on the moss. Is in the way your breath settles into the rhythm of bird song. It's in the way the world seems suddenly to move with you instead of around you. You pass through shaded glades over low hills, across small brooks that babble secrets in languages no one's written down. And then slowly the thought begins to settle. You are no longer just someone who visited the bees. You are a keeper of them now, whether or not you own a hive. You carry the hush. You carry the hum. And when the time comes, you'll pass it on. Like honey, like memory, like the soft thrum of wings in morning light. The world slows now. You're no longer in the meadow, no longer beside the hives or the linden tree. But the hum is still with you. In your chest. In your breath, is in the pause between one heartbeat and the next. Let yourself drift now, not towards sleep, but into a place where the edges blur. The walls of your room soften, while the ceiling stretches into sky. The mattress becomes earth beneath you. A low, warm hum wraps around your limbs. The wind lifts the edges of thought and tucks them gently away. Nothing is needed from you now. Not actions. Not effort. Not even dreaming. Let the bees keep working. Let the hives breathe without you. Let the world go on making honey in your absence. You have done enough. You have listened. You have learned the language of stillness. You have carried sweetness through silence. Your breath deepens. Your fingers soften. The last bit of tension floats out of your spine. And somewhere not far, a candle flickers near a wooden hive. A hand touches the wax. A voice hums a familiar tune. And in that hum, in that soft, low hymn of presence, your body remembers what it means to be safe. Sleep now. There is nothing to fix, nothing to prove, nothing to do. Only the hush, only the hum, only you, and the breeze, and the quiet, and the gold thread stillness. Love everything. So finally, we're resting.